everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Eggs. Today's special guest is Bruce Randall. Bruce, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thanks for having me today. It sounds like it's going to be a fun show.
I hope so.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Thank you for making time for us. Do you want to give us a quick, brief overview of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a sales executive that has started companies, been CEO, COO, and now I'm working for myself. I help companies save money on AWS and Microsoft Cloud. And I'm
I might
writing a
be
book.
hitting you up here in a little bit.
Yeah, it gets expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a book, The AI Human Paradox, because a lot of people don't really understand AI, and then they don't understand, the consciousness that they have. So I'm bringing those two together since Neuralink had started that, and I'm kind of buttoning it up so everybody understands where we are.
Nice.
Well, I mean, it's obviously a super relevant topic. I mean, we just had all this DeepSeek news hit the press the other day, and so there's a lot of stuff going on in AI. So I think that'll be an interesting topic.
Yeah.
So do you have a background in tech? I think I saw that you went to MIT. Is that correct?
Yeah, I took a course at MIT, a certificate course, because I was selling software with AI, and then I wanted to know the back end. So I took an 80-hour course to understand the back end, which is pretty much math, right, and probabilities. And then I put the whole thing together, and that's what I talk about and what I do in the book, in an elementary way in the book, so people can understand it. Because if you tried to go to the course and understand it, it's a bit challenging. But just understanding the basics, you'd be better off in whatever job you're doing.
Yeah. It's amazing how much a quick overview can just kind of clarify things for you. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be a full year course, but just like you did, an 80-hour class can open doors, or at least enlighten you to understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting, and I've kind of thought this, we've talked about it with a couple other AI experts on the show over the last, 6 months or 8 months, but I feel like the consumer rollout on AI hasn't been done very well, and I feel like they did kind of a disservice, because I think it's created a bunch of maybe false understandings, or have people thinking differently about the way AI can actually influence their life. I mean, you have sort of the version of it that you hear in the news that AI is taking over and we're all in trouble and every job's going away. You have, the tech guys coming on and talking about it. No, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. Just trust us. We're going to do whatever. Your data is safe. And then what started happening, at least what I was seeing in consumer software, was that, everybody's bolting on an AI this or an AI that. And it just kind of does the thing you were doing anyway, faster, I guess, or it'll summarize whatever you're reading. But I feel like it's kind of like a tacky or a kind of a bolt-on AI solution. It's not maybe even something really needed. It was just like, oh, well, everybody's got AI, we should have AI. So I feel like the way that it's been rolled out, I think people don't understand, first of all, the novelty of the technology. I don't think they understand what's truly capable, even today, in today's version of AI, I don't think they really understand what can be done with it. And I think the application they're getting, in these different softwares and stuff, where it's like, let us finish the sentence in your email, is so like nerfed, I guess, that it's like, I don't feel like they're getting real exposure to the technology. They're not understanding what it is. So there's this big technological shift, but I think you can make an argument that most people really don't even know what it is yet.
That's right. That's right. Most people don't, and they listen to what's put out there, and then they try and understand it. And you use a large language model, which is like ChatGPT or Claude or one of those. You put in your input, you get information out, and then you fine tune it, just like a search engine, right? But you get different information from AI, because AI is a fixed database, where search engines, it's wide open. They're giving you links and so forth to whatever's relevant, but AI only looks in the database that it's trained on. Now there's hybrids that are being worked on now, where they'll search the internet and the AI database, but those aren't out, proven, and they're not out in the market yet.
Huh. Yeah, it's incredible. Just the last year or so, what's changed in the AI, kind of forecast. About a year ago, when ChatGPT kind of came out, everyone's like, "Hey, I'll use it to write a quick legal document or a quick email or something like that." Now, even in your editors, like for software, like Cursor, for example, I don't know if you messed around with that. It's amazing how you can just give it a quick prompt and say, hey, I need this to do this. And it does it, which is just incredible. Stuff like that has me excited, and it also has me a little nervous of the future. Can you maybe talk about um, what excites you about AI and what makes you nervous?
Sure. And you made a really good point because you're using Cursor as an enabler. And that's really what AI is. It enables you to do things better and faster. It doesn't replace what you have to do. It just helps you get there. And, right now, depending on the vertical you go to, so if you're going to say one of the arts like music or writing or one of those, that's an enabler that can enable jobs. It can also replace some jobs. And if somebody uses it, they can use it better and faster to get things done in a quicker manner. Now, there's a lot of lawsuits in that because they're using information that they scan from the internet, and it's not all free and clear. Some of it's encumbered, and
Didn't
that's
didn't Sam Altman like grab all that information, and then just recently all his stuff got grabbed too, so he was
right.
like scraping everything, and then someone just scraped him and called it good.
Well, and to build on that, they're talking about we can do synthetic data. We can build synthetic data from the data that's in the AI database. And I'm like, wait a minute. If the stuff in the AI database isn't all accurate and you build synthetic data on that, you're going to get imperfections in that. That's not really where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, sort of to that point, I mentioned a few minutes ago, this DeepSeek thing that's going on.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, DeepSeek is basically a Chinese competitor to something like OpenAI's ChatGPT that everybody is talking about. And but what's interesting, and I don't know if this is anecdotal or true, it's not true in my experience, but I read this someplace. But somebody was saying that if you ask DeepSeek who it is, it will basically say, "I'm ChatGPT," meaning that at some point, somewhere to Mike's point about somebody got scraped. It seems to me that they were able to build out this new product, really quickly, probably leveraging some of ChatGPT's data. And what's interesting about that is that, so when they came to the table, it actually ended up crashing NVIDIA and a bunch of other companies' stock because all of a sudden it looked like you could build a fully, functional GPT model, as robust as ChatGPT's product with basically almost no money, relatively no money. A ChatGPT or OpenAI is trying to build a $500 billion data center right now. And these guys supposedly put it together on about $5 million. And so all of a sudden, all the investors and everybody are going, "Oh my God, we can't put this kind of money into this thing. Clearly you could do this for nothing." And I think now the news is starting to bear out that that's probably not the fact, and there's some chicanery going on here. But nonetheless, it's been an interesting case to watch.
Yeah, what DeepSeek's done is they've done what data did a long time ago. They put their data in silos. So when you go to get the data, you only have to light up part of the database to get that data. So you're not lighting up the whole database and using all that energy. And data's done that in the past. You go from silos to data lakes, and now you're going to specialized silos, right? So we go back and forth. But I think when DeepSeek came out, it was that shock factor, right? And it was a big one. And then as people looked into it, they said, well, looks like they trained on data that OpenAI had to train on. And then you look at the algorithms and say, if they're going to silos to get this and you've got this big database, how do you update those? So it brings in more questions than we have answers to. So it's a faster way to do some things, but we haven't vetted it out to know if it's faster with everything or what its full capabilities are. And to point, if you want to test these models, there's got to be some way where you can test the capabilities on maybe equations or something to see how they do and get a benchmark. Because if we had a common benchmark, then we could have something to measure them all to see what they can do in the highs and lows and so forth. But we're just not there yet. We're not advanced yet to have that. And we don't really have any controls on it right now. So no matter what form of AI you look at, if you can build it, it's okay, whether it's in human or out of human or on the web.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and I'm really interested to see what the next 5 years looks like, because just in the last year it's changed a ton of things, and in 5 years, who knows? Sky's the limit, which is cool and scary. Can you
Well,
tell us about your book, why
Mhm.
you wrote it, and the concept behind it?
Yeah, and the reason I wrote it is because I was in AI and software, and then when the large language models came out, it was it was kind of confusing to a lot of people. And then we've gone with Neuralink putting chips in, in memory, and we've gone beyond that right now with deep fakes and copies of people and robots and people that look like people, and it's hard to tell. So I think most people are still on what's AI and LLM. So it's a matter of bringing AI to them in terms that they understand, that people understand, so they can understand basically what it is. Because you hear all the capabilities, but you're not sure what it is. So in explaining a little bit of the history, where it is, it's really software, right? So it's a fancy new software that can do different things, and then explaining that and in a way that everybody understands. And then I have a futuristic point where we talk about the future. And I don't know if you guys know much about quantum computing, but that's being used in R&D right now and in certain aspects. The difference between quantum computing and a regular computer. A regular computer looks at data in a flat line, right? Lines of code. Quantum computer will look at all sides of the data and bring out probabilities based on all outcomes because it sees all sides of the data. It's instead of just one flat side. And then it comes out and says, well, we have more opportunities here or more probabilities because we're looking at all sides. And then if you get AI with quantum, and then AI gets to look at other probabilities, you've got something that can. You talk about 5 years, we can jump in 6 months if they perfected that. And all of a sudden, we're seeing things that we've never seen before. And AI right now in the pharmaceutical industry is already producing new materials for drugs that they didn't know about before because they're using the data to come up with new formulations.
That
And then with
that's
quantum,
that's the type of stuff that I'm really excited about. You know, the advances in like Alzheimer
yeah,
research and cancer and all these different things that have kind of befuddled us in the past are now kind of they're able to take all these data points from previous
mhm,
patients and information and stuff like that, and then they can actually make logical, reasonable decisions based off of that. And that I'm really excited about. I'm
yeah.
kind of, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it affects the medical industry. Like, is diabetes going to be a thing of the past here in 5 years? Who
Yeah,
knows?
it's interesting, and so there's a couple things I wanted to mention. One about just sort of the scale of quantum computing, because that's what
mhm,
I've kind of heard is that when quantum computing happens, that basically that will be the catalyst that kicks off AI and kind of brings it into whatever sentience or whatever's next.
wow,
And
wow,
so I'm excited to see what happens with all that. But I think I heard somebody explain it this way, and I'll probably screw up this metaphor, but basically the idea was that if you take today's best computer and
mhm,
you imagine that every star, everything, every galaxy, everything that exists in this whole great big universe was a computer. So each one of those items, every star, every whatever, was a computer. There's a math problem or a sequence that they've run through these
Is it the
quantum
Fibonacci
computers
sequence?
that basically, if you had that much computational power, it would burn on and ad infinitum, the sun would burn out before we had a solution.
right.
And alternatively, with quantum computing, they can do it in about an hour.
That's correct.
Wow.
So it's
I've
like,
heard that
I
too.
mean, yeah. So it's so many leaps
Right.
and bounds beyond that. I think it's even hard for us to think about. It's like when people talk about money in the millions or the billions or the trillions.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it moves to an area where we go, yeah, I get a trillion, but you don't really get a trillion. It's like,
How many
so I
zeros is
mean,
that? Yeah.
yeah, so quantum I think is a little bit like that, which is it's this whole notion of like you mentioned, seeing all sides of something, but it's like multi-dimensional the way
Yeah.
it's seeing it's
Yeah.
very bizarre. So and I've heard everything, estimates from 10 years on that before it's really functional to same thing you were saying, 6 months. And so I'm really excited to see that. So and then I just kind of wanted to add on the conversation too about the medical implications of AI and some of these things, and beyond just medical. I think what's so interesting about AI or the capability it has is that it's able to locate information or make correlations between data that we wouldn't otherwise see. And so to your point about being able to create these, maybe new prescription or new drugs or new different, therapeutics or different approaches,
Sure.
it's basically seeing the world's data at once and looking at it holistically versus one doctor in one clinic someplace. And so the way it does that is so interesting. But I do think it's important also, and you mentioned this also, that it was, that it is software.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, especially people who have sort of like just barely a grasp on what AI means, I think, and we even use these terms, but I mean, when we talk about it thinking, it's not thinking. It's not really
Right.
a computer. It's not really alive. It doesn't think in the way that we think, so to speak. And it's interesting, like in ChatGPT's latest model, it describes to you what it's thinking about or pondering while it's working on a solution for you. So they're even kind of bridging that gap to try and make it look more like they're thinking the way we think. But it's interesting because you have to think about it still as being kind of the stone cold computer that's running algorithmic things and stuff. I mean, it's an advance forward, but it's not so scary if you don't think of it as being alive.
Right. And ChatGPT, I think it's 4.0 they're coming to. They say it could think for 4 seconds to 28 minutes. And that's saying it's good. It's giving you more. It's getting more time to give you better data. So the more time you have to scan and compare, the more accurate you can get theoretically.
Yeah,
Unless it's a simple question that doesn't take long.
sure.
So we'll see when it comes out how it is, because they keep upping the bar and moving it faster and faster forward. And if we look a year ago where we were, and then we looked at today, I didn't think we'd be where we are today, because I mean, some of these in the medical field, Neuralink's working on the fourth brain implant. BlackRock has somebody that they can drive a car just with their thoughts,
Wow.
right? And most people don't even realize that, but this is where it's going in body. So you mentioned that AI doesn't have sentience, but when you put a chip in somebody, now you've got the intelligence with the sentience. You've kind of jumped ahead and you say, well, I can't. AI is going to be 20 years before it becomes sentient, if it ever does. But if I put it in a person, then I get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's like somebody I heard one time make the argument that we were already cyborgs, right? Because you think of like cyborgs in the future as, Terminator or whatever, like
Right.
that's a cyborg. But the reality is we have a computer in our pockets, most of us, that can access basically anything at any time in any way, in any language from any country, whatever we want to know. And, and by virtue of that, we're cybernetic, and so, and as an extension of that, the stuff they're doing with Neuralink is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And but that human computer interface, is basically, I think, the evolution of this. So I think people look at it and they go, wow, this is really radical, but maybe it's not really. I mean, technologically it's a leap, of course, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but I think that, in terms of like human adoption and things like that, I think we're not so far removed from there now. They just haven't actually stuck it in your brain yet.
Well, I can give you an example. I've been meditating for 20 years and I'm a Reiki master, so I can put a piece of paper on a pin, and with my mind I can make it spin on the pin. Okay. So to me, I can do that. I could probably, if I tried hard enough, work the computer, but it's not important to me. I don't want to do that, right? I just want to see I can do it. So when you talk about we're almost cyborg, we can do things that we don't realize, but Neuralink is really pushing the bar forward to saying, what else can we do? We can restore vision next just by connecting to the optical nerve. So you take a quadriplegic who can be functional now. Now you get take people that are blind and they can see. I mean, what's next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
So
it's one of these things I reflect on quite a bit because my father just passed away. I guess it's been a year, almost 2 years now.
I'm
But
sorry.
well, I guess 2 years. And
Yeah.
so, but he had Parkinson's, and I remember when we found out he had Parkinson's, and then he also had a thing called Lewy body dementia, and so the combination of the two is pretty bad. And so, but I remember when I found out he got sick and everything, I had gone up to spend some time with him, and I took this big fat book. It was like a Tony Robbins book, but it had a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff about medical stuff, and I bought it specifically because it had a big section on Parkinson's technology and kind of what's in the future. And I remember thinking at the time, watching my dad decline, and even recently, I just lost an uncle to stage 4 liver cancer. And I'm going, God, guys, if you could have just made it 5 more years, 10 more years,
Yeah.
like where will we be? It's like, I mean, sure, it's not a sure thing, but it's like when you read about what's coming, it's like we're right on the cusp of being able to handle most of these kinds of things, it seems like.
Yeah, the probability is increasing as we make advancements, particularly in the medical field. So you don't know what's going to be next year, but at this point, nothing will surprise me with where we are today.
So, can we talk about Neuralink a little more? I'm sure most everyone has heard about it, but doesn't really understand the process of what's going on. How do they, how do they install the chip or the computer in your brain? How does it actually connect? I mean, what kind of maintenance do you have? Yeah, I don't know. Do you have to do an oil change every 3,000 miles? Who knows? But what I'm getting at is it's still rather new, but the concept is cool. And will it be mainstream in 10 years? Will everyone have one? I don't see it happening that fast, but I feel like in 30 years that might be a thing.
Well, it could happen sooner than you think, and nobody knows. But what you do is they will open up the person's skull. They'll put the chip on the brain. They'll put probes into the brain, and they'll connect it through a computer. And when the person comes up, then they gain their motor skills. They gain their abilities. They train them. They have to charge once a day to charge the battery, but they can sit in front of the computer, and with their minds they can control the mouse. And Nolan, the first one, he's won a lot of games because he's very good at it with his mind. And his comment was, sometimes the cursor moves before I think about it, but it always
Hmm.
goes to where I think I want it to go.
Wow.
So, and then you get thin film where they can just put a thin film so you don't have to probe into the brain, and it sits there. And then they can read the connection from the brain, and you can do a lot with that. And this third thing that I think is just amazing, they can open up the carotid, put a pill in there that dissolves, and you can send nodes throughout the body so they can read the brain, they can connect with any part of your body, and they can enable your body to do things. So this is kind of sci-fi, but it's today in R&D, and a lot of people just don't realize it.
So this is deep, and it might be. Ryan just mentioned he lost his dad a few years ago, right?
Mhm.
With LLMs and this capability, could you do like a data dump of his dad and be able to, because that kind of
Yeah.
that's cool and scary at the same time to me.
Well, there are experts that are saying that within the next 3 to 5 years, you'll be able to back up your brain on a hard drive,
Wow.
right? Now, I find that a little bit hard to fathom right now because nobody's done anything like that. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. And it doesn't mean that, you know, it may be beneficial where you might be able to clone somebody. I mean, in 2020, I lost both my parents in home hospice. I was taking care of them, right? A day between one day and the next, one died, then the other one died.
Wow.
And that kind of got me
Sorry.
really, oh, thanks. But that got me really kind of going on what ifs, right? And to your point, Ryan, that I think we're going to get there. We're just not there yet. And another 5 months or 5 years, if it were 5 years, we'd definitely be able to do something because I see that. I just, it's an estimate. It's not a hard line because none of us know. But in
Yeah.
5 years, I can see that happening with the advances we're making,
Well,
especially
it'll
with.
be interesting too because there's sort of the superficial version of this now. We had a guy on the podcast that runs a company called Personal AI.
Mhm.
And what Personal AI does is basically ingest a bunch of your data, like articles you've written, podcasts you've been on, things like that. And it creates sort of a parallel you that
Mhm.
can be used like almost like a chatbot, right? So you can talk to it and ask questions. And theoretically, it's supposed to answer questions kind of in the way that you might,
Mhm.
or dig into what conceivably is your data set, right? So
Right.
if you've pumped all this stuff in there and it's a lot of opinion pieces and all these things, like it may be able to answer sort of in a way that seems like you. And I've seen iterations of this working for different people. We have another past show guest, a pretty popular guest named Chris Doe. He has a thing called the Dobot. And same thing. It's, he gets bombarded all day, every day with questions, but he's got a YouTube video or a YouTube channel that's thousands of videos deep. And so this data set has been, or his AI has been trained on basically everything he's written, done, whatever.
Sure.
And so, for the common questions, pretty easy. You just talk to Chris, you get a question
Mhm.
from him. And so I think there's versions of this already. I think where you start to draw the line, and this goes back to my comments on AI being sort of just software, so like don't give it too much credit, is if you are able to, let's say, download a snapshot of everything that's in your mind at any given time, right? So here's your brain, or here's a backup of grandpa, or here's whatever. um, you might be able to interact with it in a way that feels convincingly alive.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're quite to capturing like the real spirit just yet. You know what I mean? So it's good in a sense. I mean, it seems like kind of the future of preservation, or it seems like the way that we'll keep records in the future, right? Like it would be, I mean, for me, it would be meaningful to be able to just go, to DadBot and say, hey, Dad, you remember 1960, you bought this car, I was really curious about that car. What do you remember about that car? Right? Like, so, I mean, it could be very cool. And I think it could be useful. And, especially like if you think of the world's great geniuses or stuff, being able to, slap Einstein's brain in a machine and ask it questions might be interesting. And so, but I think, to the extent that we're still just in software land, it's like, I don't know, you could almost create weird artificial relationships with things that aren't real. So I don't know. So I think it's like with a lot of this technology, there's sort of gifts and curses. But I think as long as you have a realistic attitude about what AI is, and maybe that's a topic we can branch into here in a minute, I think you'll be fine. I think the idea is just you've got to use AI as a tool and not as as something you become wholly reliant.
Right. Right. And, spirit is something that you can't put in software. It's innate to us and nobody really understands what it is. I mean, you can talk to many of the scholars and they do the best way of explaining it, but they don't always hit the mark when it comes to what it is because nobody really understands it. If you meditate for a long time and you really connect with it, you get an idea what it is. But unless you spend all that time to do that, you've got the textbook version.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, or dig a little deeper into this sort of AI human paradox that you're describing. I mean, we've covered how, maybe through software or technologies like Neuralink and thing, there may be opportunities. But I think what I wanted to try and allude to is like operating with AI, what we've got today. And obviously I haven't read your book, so I don't know if this is what you're talking about. But it seems like, and this goes back to people with kind of a rudimentary understanding of AI versus what you can actually do with it. It seems like people are afraid of AI because they think it's a replacement rather than an augmentation.
Right.
And so my attitude about AI is that it's really a tool or a technology or a lever that helps me get better at things faster, helps me answer questions more quickly, helps, gives me information or data or a way of thinking about something more rapidly. But it's not here to replace me. It still sort of requires my input, right? And so I wonder if you talk about just sort of your take as you did your research and explored for your book, if you talk about sort of your version of what human potential versus AI integration looks like, how people can use this in the workplace, and sort of what the future of that looks like.
Sure. Well, first of all, AI is an enabler, so it's supposed to enable us. And anything that somebody's going to build, there needs to be a human involved in it because you need that human intervention. You can't just let AI go out and do its thing because there's times before where AI creates a new language and they had to unplug it because it was starting to communicate in ways they couldn't understand. So, but it's a software. And if you use it to enable what you do, then you're going to be much better off. For example, if you're in any industry or any vertical, if you learned about AI and how it could benefit you and what you do, you could actually start to exacerbate your learning and your capabilities depending on what you're doing to have that enable you to do better. And this is something that I tell everybody. If the future of work is based on you, and each person's different in a different vertical in a different profession, if you just do something to understand it, take a course, did enough research so that you didn't understand it, you could start utilizing it because you understand it in ways that could benefit you. For example, a restaurant can have an AI chatbot, and if somebody leaves a bad review, they put their contact information on it, then the AI chatbot could send them an email saying, "I'm sorry you had a bad experience. We strive to do everything in the right way, and if you'd like, we can offer you a 30% discount if you come back." And the next time the person comes in, they give the discount. They know that they're the rebound customer, right? They had a bad review, and they can treat them a certain way, and they get and they get the information back. They can assimilate that with some very good suggestions on what you can do to fix the restaurant. Now, software can do that, but AI can do it in a way that it seems more like a human when it reaches out to somebody. That's where it enables you to improve versus just using your forms in your software to reply, where you can get some conversation going with the person, and that's programmed in, of course, and that way, that's technology that's helping a restaurant do better, as an example. And there's many other ways you could utilize it, but that, it's not replacing anybody. It's just helping them. And in Japan, they did a study where they had humanized robots serving people, and they took a survey. How did people like that? Well, in that case, a small percentage thought it was really unique. That they're techies, they liked the experience and so forth. The rest of the people said, it's good, but I miss the relationship that I developed with the server. Where you can talk a little bit here and there, and you can get a feel for them and leave them a tip if they're really good, and so forth. And the general public's going to decide everything for how AI progresses in the marketplace. And I don't think it's there yet in some areas, such as serving people or trying to replace people. But as an enabler, it's very good because it can help people to do things faster, better. So you can focus on what you do best instead of doing all the work to get to that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, it just makes me think about how people can start to use these things. And I wrote an article once some time ago about sort of just as a society, us reaching a technological sort of impasse where we're starting to feel like we needed to reach out and get our hands on tactile relationships and
Yeah.
tactile things, so you started to see a rise in things like beard oils and craft beer and stuff like
Right.
that, as we kind of sanitized life. We got to the point where we even just, now we just click on pictures of buttons. We don't even click buttons anymore. And so I've got sort of this notion that there's always going to be a need for whatever that human thing is.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that we won't evolve to a place where maybe when you go to a restaurant, you are sort of served by a humanoid robot, like that may be the future of things. But I think we'll still be looking for human interaction in one way or another. We'll get it from somewhere else maybe, but we'll be getting it from someplace because I think it's part of the human experience, even if, even if technology or other things sort of allow us to be, I guess, as distant as we want to be. I think there's going to be sort of something human that keeps us, striving to reach out to people.
And we need that. We need that human to human relationship. That's what keeps us going because we're all connected. And if we lose that connection, we just don't feel we feel there's something missing. And a computer or a robot just can't give you that connection. No matter how good they are, it's just not the same kind of connection.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of what we alluded to. I mean, I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but we kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier in the kind of the discussion about spirit or being able to identify spirit in a computer. It's this ethereal thing. We don't know what it is, but
Yeah.
there's definitely an energy you feel when you get near a person or when you're having a conversation or the way your brain lights up when you're having a meaningful conversation. These things I think are going to be, I mean, maybe one day we'll get there with tech too, through a Neuralink or whatever, we'll be able to just bypass humans altogether. But but I suspect that those things are so out on the fringe of human replaceable, just by doing technology or whatever, that I think that there's always going to be a place for that.
Yeah, I think they're fringy. Some of them you can have conversations based on some data that's there, but they're fringy because, to my point, the public's not going to accept that. They're going to rebel against that because that's not what most of the people want. Maybe the first adopters would want that, but the rest of the people aren't there yet.
Well, and I can see a version where society goes, okay, well, people love robots in restaurants, so let's just every restaurant has robots in it. And then people will be craving the restaurant where there's a human waiter and
Right.
all that stuff.
That's
And
right.
then that becomes a key differentiator, right? So we
Yeah.
end up going kind of, it's like so many things in our world, sort of, on a pendulum. We swing too far one way or the other, so we go, oh man, AI is great and we can be super efficient. We could save money and stop paying payroll because we can just have robots and we can stop doing all these things and it's so great. And then, oh crap, we love people and we need to go back to people. Let's have more people, and then, and we'll swing back the other way. And then eventually maybe we'll kind of get to the middle and you can go to the burger place and have your robot flip your burger for you. And then you can go to the fancy restaurant and have a nice waiter work for you.
Yeah. Either way, public's going to determine that. It's going to be based on their adoption, really.
Yeah, it's crazy. So in the software world, um,
Mhm.
AI is making leaps and bounds for
Yeah.
guys like me who are kind of. I've been around for about 5-6 years doing software now,
Mhm.
and you know I have a good grasp of how it works and what's required. Um, but having the AI element to use as a tool in my software development, you
Right.
know, repertoire helps immensely. It
Yep.
speeds up, you know, finding bugs, fixing
Right.
things, creating a form. You can just say, "Hey, I need a form with this input," and you know, style it according to my preferences,
Mhm.
and it does pretty good. Um, but I was reading an article the other day saying that a lot of the up and coming software developers don't have a basic grasp on basic things because they're using AI as a crutch, and they're just giving prompts, but they don't understand what it's actually returning and how to change it, or you know why you would go this route versus this route. I could see that happening in multiple
Mhm.
fields, not just in the software field. Um, do you do you see that as a problem, or do you see that as something that, you know, like when the smartphone came out, it kind of, you know, everyone used to say you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket all the time. You need to know basic arithmetic. Now it's like I have you know, a computer that's with me 24/7, can answer any question I want. It's it's like a double-edged sword. It's great. It's an awesome tool, but if you use it as a crutch, you're hindering your own progression.
Yeah, and it's to my point, it's really an enabler. I mean, AI has been in software for for the last probably 6 years, and right now, when you look at ERP and CRM, they're coming together as one because AI and the functionality is bringing them together. So it's changing the software world. You can write an app, right, an AI app, and you can do it in Java, and you can test the code in like ChatGPT or one of those, and they can fix the errors in the code. That's an
Hmm.
enabler where it can get you if you're challenging on a code, you can put it in there and it get fixed and say, "Gee, thanks," and you put it in, and it works. But it's not going to replace it. And if you use it as a crutch, you're going to run into some problems. Being an enabler or a clutch, there's a line there, and you just can't cross that line, right? You got to kind of know what you're doing. That's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I see this a lot. My wife's a teacher. And so, obviously AI has led to a lot of kids writing a lot of papers in AI.
Yeah,
And, they go from being, D students to all of a sudden writing, college level thesis
yeah,
and don't think anyone's going to catch on. And so I think this is the crutch we're talking about, which is, it's almost a problem, but maybe this is, a good kind of philosophical argument or discussion, which is how much does it matter that you need to know things, right? So, because I think that at least me and Mike are about the same age. I think our generation is still sort of that where we're like,
We
you
remember
know,
what it's like pre-internet.
well, yeah, like there's, I don't know if it's virtue or what it is, but there's kind of something to knowing stuff, right?
yeah,
Like, I mean,
yeah,
my wife gives me crap all the time for the dumb things I know, but it's like, but like there's this foundational knowledge that then by virtue of being, 44 years old, I lived a piece of my life without internet and a piece of
yeah,
it with it.
yeah,
And basically I've been here for the whole progression. Right. And so I've been able to layer all these things on top of sort of a fundamental knowledge. I guess the equivalent is AI, which is, they're building large language models on the world's data and then,
right.
leveraging that data set. And so I'm kind of doing something similar in my own life. But, it's been interesting just, and I'm seeing this in raising kids. We have an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old, but it's like the things they don't know. Right. And it's
Mhm.
the stuff you don't think about, but it's like, you know, do you know how to buy an airplane ticket? Do you know how to walk through an airport? Do you know how to go through security?
Right.
It's like there's all these little things that, parents just do for their kids or whatever, but it's like, we kind of take for granted that we have that fundamental knowledge, and so as it pertains to Mike's point around, math or whatever, like, are we going to evolve to a standpoint where basically it's not necessary for us to know math, and it may already not be necessary. We can run it through AI or whatever at this point, probably. And so, I imagine there's arguments for both, which is, kind of what Mike was saying earlier too, which is like, how do you prompt the AI if you don't know anything? But are we going to be able to circumvent that and get to the point where it's okay if we're all just kind of like the blobs from that movie Wall-E? We're just a bunch of big fat people sitting in chairs and, drinking our milkshakes every day. And that's kind of it, because we don't have to do anything.
Well, I mean, to your point, you know how we were all taught to write in cursive and spell correctly
Yeah.
when we were
When's the last
younger?
time you wrote in cursive?
Well, with Microsoft Word, you don't need to spell anymore because it corrects your spelling. You just type and it corrects it. I mean, so certain things are going to be less important in the future to be able to do. And a lot of the kids now can't write cursive because they just don't teach it anymore.
Yeah, they
Right.
don't.
But there's a balancing point where when you're out and you don't have the AI in front of you, you got to be able to function. Right. And that requires a wide range of skills. And those skills aren't going to be replaced by an AI. So I think we have to be cognizant of it. And I think, education is, I mean, you talk about the pendulum swinging. Everybody's got different opinions on education. Some are way over here, some are way over there, and some are in the middle, right? So that's really an open-ended question, and we're not going to know the answer to that, except that in the past, we've adopted certain skills that we didn't need anymore, like spelling, and I don't know what it's going to be in the future. I mean, right now with math, I can go on the computer or my phone and do anything, right? I don't need to know calculus. And when I took the course at MIT, it was heavy in math in the back, as you can imagine. It's all mathematics, and you're cleansing data with math, and you're putting data together with math, and and you're combining or stripping out with math. I mean, it's a heavy mathematical equation. So until that becomes normalized, and I don't think it really will in the short term, I don't think you have to worry about that right now. It's a very slow curve of replacing, from what I can see. I may be wrong, but it's just a very slow curve of replacing. And with
Well,
all the things we talked about, I mean, that could change in 6 months,
yeah.
right?
Well, and that's the thing, is it seems like there's going to have to be an evolution in the way that we teach kids and the way that we train humans to be human in the future, which is, I mean, I think what we do now is kind of an extension of what we did in, I don't know, in my grandparents' age,
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, they still went to school, they learned the basics, history, math, science, et cetera, and we still do kind of a version of that, although I have some concerns about the way the education system is playing out right now, as what I'm seeing in my kids'
Right.
schools. But it seems like in the future, like there could almost be more of like a need for like a vocational type training,
Right.
where you can go to the computer for math, or somebody's going to have a phone around and they can solve the math. So you don't need to know the math, but you do need to know how to, I don't know, chop wood, start a fire.
Well, so
like whatever it is.
I'm doing this remodel at the house, right? And I'm talking to friends about it, and like, oh, I had to change the P traps in the shower. I had to, frame a wall and put cement board on it, and put, things that to me are second nature, but to them they're like, how do you know how to do all this stuff?
That's
And
right.
really, it's just because my dad taught it to me when I was a kid, and really that kind of vocational stuff, I think is gonna. There's a reason plumbers make so much money, and there's a reason
And
electricians
actually,
do.
yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because so we just had brunch on Sunday with some friends, and we were talking about school, and one of the things that they made a priority that I wish I'd have thought of for our son was making sure that their senior is graduating with a trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we have, luckily, we're in a good school district, and we have a lot of opportunities for kids in this area. And so their son is going to one of the community colleges for one of his periods and learning to weld, right?
Yep.
So now he's become a pretty proficient welder over the last couple of years. And, so we spend a lot of time thinking about AI and tech and all these things and how this is going to affect, computer programmers and all that stuff. But Mike just raised the point, and it actually totally shifted my brain. Like, I totally had kind of forgotten the physical world around us, which is that, I mean, we got to be able to do everything in the world too. Like, we still got to make sure we can flush a toilet, so, I mean, so it's important that, and so it might be that is more of the future of what education ought to be, is learning how to do a few things, and maybe operating a computer and being able to prompt AI to get whatever you want out of it is one of those things we train people on.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem that it would make an awful lot of sense to be teaching kids something, whether it's welding or plumbing or framing houses or whatever. Like, I mean, no AI is going to build your house. Now maybe they could leverage a million robots and put it together at some
They're
point.
3D printing homes, Ryan.
Right.
No,
We're going to be a minute off before that's widespread, and there's going to be, a
right.
generation or two in between. And so I mean, and if you think about it too, like, I mean, these are very American problems, I think. Like, I mean, if you were in sub-Saharan Africa, I don't think they're worried about what ChatGPT is up to. And so it's, so I think there's lots of parts of the world too that really don't care about the conversation we're having, which is, I think back to this notion that, our kids need to know how to do something,
Yeah.
and I think, being capable of doing some things with your hands, even if it's just for sustenance alone, just, so you know how to take care of yourself or your family in the case of emergency. It's like these basic skills are going to be lost because we can go, oh, well, our computer overlords are the way, we'll just follow the computers. I'll praise the computer. And, and then we'll have a solar flare and no one will know how to do anything and we'll just die eating our lawns,
Well, to your point, I mean, when I grew up, I mean, I know how to build a house, do a foundation. I can do plumbing. I can do electrical. I can replace windows because I learned that when I was younger, right? My growing up is different than the people that are 20 years old now, right? Unless you have a parent that does that and can teach you that, you're not going to learn it. So it's really
But on the same note, YouTube has opened doors for me of things that I didn't think I can do that I've just figured out because there's data there that teaches me. So it is like, like I learned how to lay a shower pan and do stuff like that off of a YouTube video. And it's like stuff I haven't done before. I have the access to learn myself instead of going to Joe the plumber and saying, hey, teach me how to do this. Someone has done a tutorial and I can go and do that. So the tech is important. You just have to have the person that's willing to get their hands dirty and actually go and learn it on their own and apply it to what they need.
Well, and maybe you can add to this, Bruce, but like one of the things that I'm seeing or hearing from my wife, she teaches 8th and 9th grade kids, senior or honors English. And so she's working with some of the smarter kids or the brighter kids in her school. And, but one thing she's talked about, and I see it somewhat in our kids, we've really empowered our kids to do a lot, but, to Mike's point, like he's leveraging YouTube in the same way that we've been discussing using AI, right? As a tool. This is a thing that can help you get to the next level. And in Mike's case, he's built up enough knowledge and having done renovation, and figuring out how to knock out walls or pull out, trays or whatever he's doing, that he knows what to go ask for and what to look for. But what it seems like is happening in younger people is that there's a disconnect between, or it's almost like a fear of failure or an unwillingness to try, and I don't know if it's totally fear or if it comes down to they don't know how to ask or don't know how to begin or don't know where to prompt or don't, whatever the approach is. It's like there's something to do with decision making and problem solving that seems to be lacking in younger generations. And I think some of it is, we've nerfed things and made a very safe place for them. But I think that there's a gap there missing. So like while Mike has the wherewithal to run right to YouTube, I don't know if everybody has the curiosity or the willingness to learn. And I think that could be one of these skills that needs to be worked on.
And that's my thought, because you get the people like Mike they're going to go to YouTube and look to do it, and then you get the others that are going to say, I've never done it before, I don't know how to do it, I'm just going to go find somebody to do it. It depends on the person. Hey, we've got all different types of people out there, right? I mean, I've learned how to do a lot of things on YouTube. I fixed my driveway, with what I learned on YouTube. But I've known how to replace windows and all that from hands-on, and whether it's an 1800s house or a 2023 house, right? I mean, I can do it. So there's a lot of variation in there. And that's why I really think that, AI, and that's really why I'm writing the book, because people are so afraid of AI based on what they've heard, right? It's fear, that it's nothing to be afraid of. You just have to understand it, and you have to understand the limits. And then you have to understand what differentiates that from people and what you have power over. And you don't have to give your power up if you don't want to. You can just let it enable you. And that's really kind of what I talk about, because people just don't understand. Because if you listen to all the news, you get scared. And if you read things, you don't really know what you're reading or not. And what I tell people about looking up on LLM is that it's trust and verify. Trust what
Hmm.
you're getting, but if it's important, verify the facts because it's not always right.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah, and I
sense.
think that really goes back to what Mike was talking about earlier about people using it as a crutch. And
Yeah.
anecdotally, I can talk about it from my wife's experience, which is AI is wildly convincing and it's
Yeah.
supremely confident in what it tells you, and for right or for wrong. And so it's pretty easy to get duped by it. And in fact, I was watching or I was flipping through X the other day, and I thought that this was kind of refreshing. I wish I could remember the guy's name because I thought it was a pretty smart thing. I don't delve too much into political stuff, but this was somebody who had been sort of attacking the current regime for whatever they were up to, right?
Mm.
And he said, well, I normally, and he came on, he made this apology video, and he's like, well, I leverage AI to try and write my scripts and things like that. And it gathers all its information from all these sources. And I didn't check it. I didn't verify it. I just ran right out and I started being hypercritical, or, making an assumption. And in this particular case, and I'm sure there's plenty of cases to the contrary, but, in this particular moment, he was going, you know what, I used AI and I didn't check my work.
Right.
And it basically led me to do something stupid. Right. And so, I remember I was helping my wife try and understand AI so that she could kind of watch for it with her kids or her students. And she had a kid. I can't remember what he was writing on. It was one of these Shakespearean stories, so Hamlet or something like this.
Yep.
And she's like, oh, okay, well, write me an essay on Hamlet or whatever. And, the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 paragraphs, pretty good, convincing. It really knows what's going on. It starts talking about this. And then it starts digressing, and I'll exaggerate for effect. But I mean, then it's like talking about the aliens landed and stuff goes crazy, and it's just like, but I mean, it went off the rails for Hamlet. And so if you were the kid in school who used this to write your paper, but you don't know Hamlet, you didn't read Hamlet, and you're just trying to get around it, like now you've given yourself away, right? And
Right.
so it's like, it's I think, and we've circled around this or described this in a lot of different ways, but I think that that's really where the superpower of AI is using it as a tool, but not as a crutch, or maybe technology at large. Really, let's use it as a tool, not a crutch.
Yeah, and there's a teacher that agreed to do a little mini study with his kids, and the company went and they took half the kids and they said use AI, and the other half of the kids said don't use AI. And the kids were pretty ingenious. That one kid loaded up a bunch of his papers and said write a paper on this, so it knew his writing style, right? And when the teacher went and got all the papers and had to figure out which ones were AI and which ones were not AI, he didn't get a good mark because it's really hard because of what the capabilities of AI is. If you load your papers in and it gets your writing style, and then you say, write me on this, it's going to be closer to you than anything else. But if you just
So
put it in there, to your point, it's not going to be that close.
I listened to a podcast called Pivot. It's
Yeah.
with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, and they were just talking the other day about using AI to mimic Kara Swisher in her book and do a summary of chapter 30 or whatever in the voice of Kara Swisher, and it nails it. It gets it 95% there in her voice, in her style, because it has a reference of
Right.
her previous writing. And the student that, uploaded his previous papers, so it writes in a similar way, that's just genius. That's just
Yeah.
next level hackery right there.
Right. Well, but what's interesting about
That's
it too,
smart.
or so is part of it comes back down, and this goes, all the way back to old school, which is just human relationships, right? So, I mean, that kid might write an essay that's very passable, but to my point earlier about if you're a C+ student, now you're coming at me with this A+ paper.
Right.
Like as a teacher, if I have any kind of relationship with you at all, or I'm familiar with the way you write or you talk or you carry yourself or whatever, I'm going to go, come on, man, like you didn't write this paper, And, she runs into the low tech version of this all the time, which are students have their parents write their papers, which I can't even imagine doing. But it's like, but parents will submit these papers, sometimes even in their parents' handwriting. And it's like, you don't think I've ever seen your stuff before? Like, what is this, So, but it's funny what Mike was just talking about with trying to, emulate the voice with AI. So the platform we use to record here is called Riverside.
Mhm.
And we've been really happy with it. And they've been rolling out a lot of different AI features for, cutting clips and things like that. So it's really cool.
Sure.
But one of the things they rolled out recently was an AI voice thing. And basically you can plug in a script and it will read something in your voice. And so I ran a little test on that for me, just to see what it sounded like and stuff like that. And when I listened back, I was like, it's pretty convincing. I mean, it doesn't hit some of the highs and the lows, or it doesn't, sort of oscillate as much as maybe regular human conversation is, but pretty dang good. But when I played it back for my wife and kids, they caught it in a second. They knew right away that it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what it is there's some intangibles in there. Like there's a way of, and maybe this goes just to the notion of like cloning somebody, right? Like you can clone your dog today. Like if you
Right.
really love your dog, you can go pay 50 grand and have your dog cloned. But the dog you get isn't your dog. It's a
Yeah.
dog that's an awful lot like your dog.
That's right.
And so it's like, so in the case of this, or like, with AI and things like that, maybe, certainly it'll continue to get better. But what we found is like, it didn't speak how I speak. It sounded like me, but it didn't speak how I speak. So my family, who knows me well, caught it in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But if I just used it to cut a commercial or something for this podcast, I don't think anybody would notice.
Right.
So it's, it's pretty revolutionary where they're getting to it. And so, but I think that there's, I don't know. I'm a hard advocate for humans still.
I agree with that. I am too. And I think to be an advocate of that, you have to understand what's out there. And that's what I'm trying to do with everybody, just to get a basic understanding.
So we're almost at that time, and I'm going to derail us real quick and pivot completely to a different topic. You specialize in minimizing AWS bills.
Yes.
Can you maybe go over that just in a brief? Doesn't have to. We don't have to have another hour-long conversation about this, but
Sure.
Mike, someone who is self-serving.
I know. I'm just curious. How do I get my bill lower?
Lots of people are AWS customers, so it's relevant.
Well, it's with AWS or Azure, and basically we do a scan with other metadata to see how you're using it, and then
Okay.
we can identify areas with AI, right? And this is where AI is an enabler. AI can go in and look.
I was pivoting. We were going off AI here.
No chance.
And companies can save 30 to 50% on their cloud bill by doing this. It's kind of a no-brainer, because once they know about it, it's just it's an algorithm. It's not AI. It's an algorithm that does this, but it's coupled with AI to find everything, right? So it's a little of both. But you've got some companies that are saving $1 million, $3 million a year, and some companies that are it's 30 to 50%. And in these days, if you can save that much, I mean, why not? And the assessment's free. We just take 30% of your monthly savings. So you get 70%, we get 30, and it didn't cost you anything except time.
So are you essentially just, I'm going to scan through your folder of images and look for the ones that are 4 gig, and we're going to take a smaller shot of them and use the same image. Is that essentially kind of what you're doing, or are you looking for a function that's doing a loop and causing, excessive queries on your database?
Good question.
Yeah.
What it does is it looks and it adjusts things, and then over 3 months, it dials it down more as it gets to know it. And then it holds that and it manages it so that you're not overusing the cloud and using it intelligently with the resources that you contracted for. So it's managing it for you in a better way that you wouldn't want to spend somebody to do that, because you have a hard time doing it. But this program does it automatically. You get what you need, you get your performance, you're just using a lot less because it's being used intelligently versus what you bought on a contract, right? Which is the best guess.
Yep. Well, Bruce, cool. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. And can you maybe tell people where they can reach out if they have any questions or want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. Or maybe if they want to pick up this book when it drops.
Yeah, the book is on my website that's not up to date yet, but it's the AIHumanParadox.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Bruce D. Randall, and my email address is brucedrandall@gmail.com. That's my public email.
Love it.
Awesome. Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate your time today and taking the time to explore this with us. I think these topics are super relevant right now, and I think it'll be more so in the future. So really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Ryan and Mike. It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.